Thanks for joining me at the News Forum, where all voices matter. This is Strictly Money, and I'm your host, Saijal Patel. If you are one of the millions of Canadians itching to travel this summer, you know by now that you need to plan extra carefully and pack a lot more patience. You'll also want to pick the right travel insurance. With flight cancellations and baggage delays, today's reality, not being properly protected can cost you thousands of dollars out of pocket. Joining me now with his advice on what you need to know before buying travel insurance is Matt Hans. He's Business Director of Insurance at Ratehub.ca. Matt, great to have you on.
Great to be here.
You know, it wasn't that long ago, I feel like travel insurance was, highly recommended, but not necessarily a must. Would you say that now travelers are really taking a big risk if they don't have it?
I would completely agree with that. Years ago, it kind of felt like an afterthought, an add-on almost that, wasn't necessary. But given the climate and the current travel conditions, not having travel insurance is a significant risk.
So let's go through what's covered and what's not, because I still feel like it's very opaque. I say this because I hear stories of someone who thought they were covered and then they were surprised that they weren't. Or when they go to claim, they're like, no, that's not our responsibility. That's someone else's responsibility. So when someone buys travel insurance, what is generally covered?
So that'll depend on the type of policy you buy. But say, for example, you buy a standard comprehensive travel insurance policy. So what you're looking for in that instance is you're looking to get trip cancellation. So that covers you up until your trip for the covered reasons. And then trip interruption, which would cover you after you've departed. So, for example, if any reason your trip was interrupted and you couldn't get to your hotel or your connecting flight, that's where trip interruption would come in. You have baggage delay or missing baggage coverage, and then medical emergency coverage. So that's really important, especially if you're traveling international, because your local, health insurance won't be there to cover you.
Okay, so let's play out a couple of scenarios, right? Because right now, huge lineups at the airport, and you hear that they recommend you have to be there 2 or 3 hours before. If you are, and you still miss your flight, and I feel like this is a gray area, Matt, would you still be covered?
Is. Unfortunately not.
Really?
Due to the long lines, your insurance company would say you should have came earlier. And, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, depending on when your flight is. So, for example, if you're traveling internationally or having to go into the United States, you have to go through customs. Some airports, customs doesn't open until 5 a.m. You may have a 7 a.m. flight. It can be a little bit tricky if you can make it on time. I've seen long delays. I experienced them. I saw some people missing their flight. It was very unfortunate. What we can say is that 2 to 3 hour delay or 2 to 3 hour in advance of coming, maybe, give yourself a little extra time these days, especially traveling out of Pearson, just because of staffing being low. I know they're working their best to increase staff in the airport and trying to expedite that process, like removing the COVID rules, especially on coming back into the country, trying to make the airport flow a little bit quicker. But all I can say these days is just give yourself extra time. And unfortunately, travel insurance won't cover you for those increased delays in airport lines.
Okay, good to know. Another scenario, Matt, that I've seen is suppose you have a cruise or tour booked or even a connecting flight, right? And you miss these because the original flight was delayed or canceled. Would your insurance policy cover this? And ultimately, I guess, who's responsible here?
So in this scenario, this is where it would be important to have trip interruption insurance. So in this scenario, you're saying that you've gone in your first part, but you've been delayed whether to get to your cruise or to your second destination. It's a little bit murky whether your cruise line is going to support you there or the airline is going to support you. I think it would very much depend on who you're working with and their policies in place. The best course of action is to have a comprehensive travel insurance policy that includes trip interruption to cover you for any scenario, especially on a cruise, that if you're stuck or left behind because you've been late getting back to the boat or some other reason occurs, you're able to find accommodations to get back on the rest of your trip.
Okay, so just to be clear, you have travel insurance, but is it considered an add-on then?
To have trip interruption? I wouldn't say considered to be an add-on. It would be part of a comprehensive standard policy, but you can purchase, various parts of travel insurance independently. Like you could just purchase trip cancellation insurance,
Right.
or you could just purchase trip interruption insurance. It all depends on the carrier and what the packages they offer.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll continue this conversation. Stay with us. COVID-19 is still around and perhaps maybe not as top of mind as say last year. Is this something in your mind that people still need to get coverage for?
It's something that I would definitely look into when shopping for coverage to make sure that there isn't any exclusions. Uh, During the peak of the pandemic, a lot of people, when we reopened again, were trying to get out and travel. And what they weren't aware of is that some insurance policies, especially credit cards, weren't covering COVID 19 as an excuse for why you had to cancel your trip or your trip was interrupted. So even though it's less of a concern today in terms of our travel restrictions, I would still verify with the provider I'm with, whether it was a credit card, purchasing it through a service like Expedia, or buying a third party travel insurance policy. That'd be one of the questions I'd want to know is that, am I covered for COVID-19 cancellation or interruption?
Okay, I want to pick up on the credit card in a second, but one of the questions I did have
Yep.
for you, Matt, is look, Canada now has this air passenger protection regulation, right? So is this helping travelers in your mind, or are there still big gaps?
I would say everything helps in general, just every little bit of litigation.
Mm,
It's going to, trying to put the passenger first as much as possible. Um, but with any policy we see, there's always little gaps or niche scenarios that occur. So regardless of what the Protection Act's in place, I would still shop around and make sure that I have the coverage I need, and I would
yeah.
look through the policy I have and the Protection Act to make sure there isn't any gaps. Especially, everyone's travel can be unique. If you're doing a more advanced or long-term trip or something that's a little bit more adventurous, you probably need more coverage than somebody who's just traveling for the weekend to say New York or something like that.
Okay. So you said shop around. So let's talk about where people should buy travel insurance because,
Yep.
I mean, there's lots of places, right? If the
Yep.
default is to check or use your credit card, whatever that is, the travel
Mhm.
insurance and your credit card, what do people have to be aware of?
The limitations are the biggest thing with the travel insurance on credit cards. I mean, it's a nice option, especially if you're paying for a premium credit card. You're paying that annual fee. It's great to take advantage of that. Just keep in mind that generally you have to purchase the trip or the accompanying expenses with your card. So what I mean by that is, if you're booking a rental car, make sure you purchase that with your credit card for your rental car insurance to go in place. But there are limitations. You got to keep in mind that the card isn't customized for your trip. It's a general insurance policy that applies to everybody, and there are specific limits and exclusions that can make it a little bit, simplified. I guess I could say at best. So it's great for small trips. Anything longer and more adventurous, because say for example you want to go skiing in the Swiss Alps, they're not going to be covering you for that. There are even age restrictions too. So if you're someone who's over the age of 64, a lot of credit cards won't even cover you.
Yeah.
And then you got to also keep in mind that if you're traveling with your family, the credit card's covering you, not necessarily your family. So that's
Good
where you'd
point.
want to think about a more, comprehensive travel insurance policy. So for single trips, for somebody, like I said, doing a weekend trip, your credit card travel insurance is probably great for yourself. And you don't need to purchase anything additional. Anything a little bit more comprehensive, especially traveling into Europe and internationally, I would probably look elsewhere for a more comprehensive policy, or at least shop around to make sure I know apples to apples what I have and what I don't have.
Okay. We only have about a minute and a half till the end of our interview, but quick question on the travel sites because it's so easy to
Hmm.
add, the optional insurance without actually reading the fine print, and it's probably
For
because
sure.
you have some time pressure, right, to book the flight. What do you advise to people?
I wouldn't make a rash decision. If you
Yeah.
know you're booking a trip far in advance, do your research ahead of time. You can look into, say, Expedia's trip cancellation and travel insurance policies. They're listed on their site. Oftentimes, they will let you add it on later. Like I was reading again through Expedia, and you can go back in and edit your trip and add on the travel insurance.
Okay.
I mean, I just booked through an airline the other day. They continued to email me and asking me if I want to purchase travel insurance with them. So it's not necessarily has to be done in the moment. we do suggest that adding a travel insurance policy as soon as possible, especially for that cancellation part. You want to make sure you're covered, especially if your flight is, say, months later. It could be 6 months later. You want to make sure that if anything happens between now and that 6 months, you're canceled for those covered reasons.
Okay, and I would say other best practices we just put up a board is if you, in
Yeah.
case you do have to make a claim, take notes, right? Keep receipts.
Take take notes, keep receipts, have proper documentation.
Yeah,
I would be, if it's a trip interruption or trip cancellation issue, call within 24 hours.
yeah,
Some
Yeah,
policies won't even cover if you're not calling you within 24 hours, and
yeah.
then medical emergencies within 48 hours.
All right, Matt, great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.